The thunderstorm hammered the old ranch home on the windswept outskirts of Helena, Montana, rattling windows in their ancient frames, turning the night wild and unpredictable. Madison stood frozen in the dim, wood-paneled hallway, her heart thudding in her chest, rain battering the glass behind her. All her senses tuned in on the frantic sounds that shattered the house's tense, grieving quiet. A sharp, echoing whinny, hooves pounding, the clatter of something heavy striking the floorboards. Chestnut, her family's beloved brown mare, was inside, wild-eyed and drenched, muscles twitching beneath her soaked coat, fixated on the dust-covered mirror hung near the front door. Madison stared in disbelief, rooted to the spot by Chestnut's terror and her own, a shared fear that made the world feel suddenly thinner, as if anything could break through. Lightning flashed, silver bright, illuminating the hallway. For an instant, Madison saw her own reflection caught in the mirror, wide-eyed and pale, hair sticking to her forehead. But it was Chestnut's panic that filled the space. Snorting, rearing, stomping at the old mirror, as though something inside it threatened to escape. The smell of wet earth and horse sweat filled the house, mingling with the electric sharpness of ozone. The air buzzed with tension. She'd seen Chestnut nervous in storms before, but never like this. "Stop! Chestnut, please!" Madison's voice broke, desperate, trying to soothe her horse with the same gentle words she'd used since childhood. But Chestnut only backed up a step, then surged forward again, hooves striking the faded rug, teeth bared at her own reflection as thunder rolled so loud it seemed to shake the pictures on the wall. A door banged open upstairs, and Madison's mother, Diane, appeared on the staircase, clutching the rail. She was still in her black dress from that morning's service, face drawn tight, lips pressed into a worried line. Madison barely noticed the fresh tears streaking her mother's cheeks. All she saw was the way Diane gripped the rail as if it were the only solid thing in the world, voice trembling as she called, "Madison, what's happening down there?" "It's Chestnut. She's gone crazy," Madison managed, breathless, still not daring to move. The storm crashed outside, wind hurling branches against the roof, and the house itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of the night. Diane hurried down, her footsteps unsteady, joining her daughter in the narrow hall. Together they stared as Chestnut circled the mirror, nostrils flaring, mane wild with static and rain. She's never done this before. Not even when Dad was sick. Lightning flashed again. Madison took a trembling step closer, heart pounding in her throat. She fumbled for her phone, the flashlight app casting a shaky beam along the wall. The frame of the mirror was battered, old walnut dulled by decades of dust, but something odd caught her eye. Faint hoof scuff marks along the baseboard and the mirror's edge, like someone or something had been here before. There were deeper scratches, too, old gouges beneath the dust. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the sense of something hidden, urgent, and very close. Chestnut slammed a hoof into the floor, making the mirror rattle on its hook. Madison gasped, reaching for the mare's bridle. "Easy, girl, easy, please." She touched Chestnut's neck, feeling the tremors rippling beneath slick fur, the animal's fear pulsing right into her skin. Diane shone a second light over Madison's shoulder, focusing on the strange marks. "What is that?" she whispered, the question trailing off, swallowed by the howl of the wind. Madison pressed her hand against the cold glass, searching for any sign that would explain Chestnut's terror. In the reflection, the three of them appeared, mother, daughter, horse, caught in a moment that felt both ordinary and impossibly strange. The mirror seemed deeper than before, the shadows behind it moving in ways that defied logic. Madison's mind spun. Why tonight? What had drawn Chestnut to this spot, to this mirror, as if she'd known there was something important here, something desperate to be found? Chestnut neighed, the sound shrill, urgent, her whole body blocking Madison from moving away. The storm battered the walls, rattled the mirror, the air charged with unspoken questions. Madison felt her pulse in her ears, her mother's hand gripping her shoulder. They were both thinking it, neither daring to say it out loud. The house was full of ghosts tonight. Not the kind that rattle chains, but the kind that live in memories, in grief, in old secrets nobody wanted to face. As Chestnut lowered her head, pressing her wet nose to Madison's back, the girl finally forced herself to speak. "Mom, do you think Dad knew about this mirror? About whatever this is?" Diane didn't answer right away. She stared at the hoof marks, at the scratches, her eyes shining with tears and something else. Hope, maybe, or dread. The next thunderclap made them all jump. Madison squeezed her mother's hand. She knew the answer wasn't going to come tonight, or maybe ever. But the question had been set loose, echoing in the halls with the storm, with Chestnut's restless pacing. Why was Chestnut, her gentle, steady mare, suddenly so desperate to reach the mirror tonight? As the wind wailed outside and the house groaned, Madison stared into the mirror's shadowed depths, knowing this night was only the beginning. The storm raged on through the night, but inside the old ranch house, the tension shifted. Madison and Diane stood shoulder to shoulder in the narrow hallway, flashlights illuminating the battered mirror that had drawn Chestnut's wild focus. Rain battered the windows, thunder pulsed through the walls, but nothing felt as loud as the silence between mother and daughter, as they stared at the strange hoof marks and scratches. Something old was buried here, something that wanted out. "Mom, we have to see what's behind it," Madison whispered, her voice tight. She glanced at Chestnut, who stood so close her breath tickled the back of Madison's neck, the mare's body quivering but refusing to leave her side. Diane hesitated, torn between fear and determination, but she nodded, the grief and exhaustion in her eyes replaced by a new urgency. "Help me," Diane said, already reaching for the mirror's heavy frame. They worked together, muscles straining as they lifted the ancient glass off its hooks, the wood creaking in protest. For a moment, Madison feared the whole thing would shatter, but Diane's grip was firm, her resolve set. They eased the mirror down, setting it gently against the wall. Behind it, hidden by decades of dust, was a faded rectangle, the outline of a secret panel, barely visible in the dim light. Chestnut pressed her nose against Madison's back, nostrils flaring as if she could sense the secrets trapped behind the wall. The mare's body blocked the hallway, tail flicking, hooves scraping the floor with restless energy. Madison felt every tremor, every breath. She realized Chestnut wasn't just scared. She was determined, too, as if guarding something precious. Diane's hands shook as she traced the edge of the panel. She looked at Madison, her voice so low Madison had to lean in to hear. "Your father never mentioned this." The words hung between them, raw and heavy. Diane searched for a seam, a catch, anything to open the compartment. Madison's fingers joined hers, probing the old wood until finally, something gave, a click, the panel shifting loose with a faint sigh. Madison's heart pounded. Diane slid her fingers beneath the edge and pried the panel open. Inside, nestled in a shallow hollow, was a battered tin box, edges rusted, lid covered in dust and a faded, curling sticker that might have once been a name. Diane pulled it free, holding it in both hands as if it were made of glass. Chestnut snorted, almost pushing Madison forward, eyes wide and bright in the flashlight's glare. Diane hesitated, then flipped the box open. The contents inside seemed ordinary at first. A bundle of yellowed letters tied with twine, a faded blue ribbon, the kind handed out at county fairs for junior writing competitions, and something heavier, metal glinting dull and tarnished at the bottom. Diane lifted it with shaking fingers, a military medal, old but well kept, engraved with a set of initials. R.C. Madison caught her breath. R.C.? Who? Diane stared at the medal, her lips parted in silent recognition or shock. She turned it over, searching for some clue, some connection. I don't know this name, she whispered, voice barely more than a breath. Your father. He never talked about any of this. Madison untied the twine around the letters. The paper crackled in her hands, edges brittle. She slid the top sheet free and angled her flashlight so the faded ink could be read. The handwriting was elegant, looping, filled with emotion. The first lines jumped out at her. My dearest Helen, tonight the storm feels as wild as my heart. Diane pressed the blue ribbon to her lips, eyes closing. Madison watched her mother, wondered how many secrets a person could carry without breaking. In the hall, Chestnut whinnied, stamping her hoof so hard the sound echoed off the old walls. Diane started, her grief replaced by something fierce and new. We're going to find out what this means, she said, voice clear. Madison reached out, squeezing her mother's hand. For a moment it was just the two of them and Chestnut. 3 lives tangled together, all searching for something lost. Rain hammered the roof. The wind whistled through the cracks. The box's contents gleamed dully in the flashlight's glow, as if the past itself was waking up in their hands. Chestnut, still restless, nuzzled the metal in Diane's palm, her breath stirring the ribbon and the old letters. Diane let the horse's nose linger there, then brushed her mane gently, a silent thank you for leading them here. She knew, Diane said, almost to herself. She knew this was here. Madison felt goosebumps rise on her arms, her mind spun with questions. Who was R.C.? Why did her horse seem so determined to reveal these secrets tonight, of all nights, just after Dad's funeral, when everything felt unfinished and raw? Suddenly, a new sound split the night. A sharp, echoing crack from the back porch, followed by the unmistakable slam of a screen door. Both women startled, hearts leaping into their throats. Madison held her breath. Chestnut's ears snapped forward, muscles tensing as if she was ready to charge. Diane motioned Madison behind her, clutching the box to her chest. For one panicked moment, Madison thought someone was breaking in. Another secret, another threat. But the wind shifted, and they realized it was just a branch thrown by the storm, the door slamming in its wake. Still, the tension remained, a warning that whatever they'd uncovered tonight was just the beginning. Madison clutched the letter, the words blurring as tears stung her eyes. Diane held the medal and ribbon tightly, searching her memories for clues that might explain this mysterious discovery. Chestnut stood guard, head high, watching the storm as if daring anything to cross the threshold. The question remained, unanswered and urgent. Who was R.C., and why had Chestnut guided them here on this night of all nights? Thunder rolled overhead, the old house trembling as if it too remembered things best left buried. Madison glanced at her mother, then at Chestnut, and realized the past wasn't finished with them yet. Later that night, after the chaos had settled into uneasy quiet, Madison found herself in the hayloft above the barn. Rain drummed steadily against the tin roof, softer now, a muted lullaby after the fury of the earlier storm. The air was thick with the smell of hay, horses, and earth. Madison sat cross-legged on a faded quilt, the bundle of letters in her lap, flashlight propped beside her, casting long shadows along the rafters. Below, the barn's dim light flickered, illuminating Chestnut's stall. The brown mare stood with her head poked over the door, eyes following Madison's every move, her presence a silent promise of comfort. Chestnut let out a low, questioning nicker, shifting in her stall as if she, too, sensed the weight of the night's discoveries. Madison smiled, just a small, tired curl of her lips, then untied the twine and chose the first letter from the stack. Her hands trembled, part from exhaustion, part from the electric thrill of mystery. Each letter was a relic from another life, fragile but urgent, as if meant to be read aloud, meant to be heard by both girl and horse. Madison cleared her throat, glancing at Chestnut. "You ready for this, girl?" Her voice was a whisper in the stillness. Chestnut flicked an ear, settling her weight, and Madison took that as a yes. She began to read. "My dearest Helen, tonight the storm feels as wild as my heart. I rode out across the pasture thinking of you, the way you smiled at me behind the old sycamore, the way your laughter carried on the wind. I wish I could tell you everything, but you know how it is. The army has its secrets. So do I." Madison's voice grew steadier as she read on, letting the words fill the hayloft. The letters told a story of a man, R.C., torn between duty and love, always reaching for Helen even when the world tried to keep them apart. There were stolen meetings by the river, hopeful plans to run away together, the ache of separation when duty called him back. Each line was heavy with longing and fear, but also with a hope that felt as alive as the storm outside. Every so often, Chestnut nudged the stall door or whoofed softly, as if urging Madison to keep reading, to not leave anything unsaid. Madison's shoulders dropped, her body relaxing into the familiar rhythm of the horse's presence. She felt Chestnut's trust anchor her, giving her courage to keep peeling back the layers of the past. One letter, written in shaky script, spoke of a brown mare named Grace. "She's the best I've ever known. Reminds me of you, steady, brave, never running from a storm. If anything ever happens to me, Helen, promise me you'll care for her. She's family, the only one I trust with my heart." Madison's breath caught as she read, glancing up at Chestnut. The resemblance. Was it a coincidence or something more? She kept going, her voice growing soft as the hour stretched on. The letters took her through heartbreak and hope, fear and resilience, as R.C. and Helen dreamed of a life that always seemed just out of reach. Madison could almost see them, two young people defying the odds, held together by their love for horses and for each other, separated by wars and secrets. Chestnut, as if sensing the depth of Madison's thoughts, pressed her head through the stall bars, lowering it gently into Madison's lap. Madison smiled, tears slipping silently down her cheeks as she stroked the mare's soft muzzle, grounding herself in the steady warmth of Chestnut's breath. "I wish you could talk, girl," Madison murmured. "Maybe you'd tell me what really happened. Maybe you'd remember things I can't." The barn felt timeless in that moment, a refuge from everything unsaid. Madison closed her eyes, letting herself drift with the old letters, feeling the pain of her father's absence and the confusion of new secrets. She missed him fiercely. She missed the certainty she'd always had, that her family's past was simple, that love could outlast any storm. Now, with every new discovery, she wondered what else was hidden, what else had been lost. Back at the house, the kitchen lights burned late. Diane sat alone at the table, the military medal in her hand. She traced the initials, R.C., again and again, lips pressed tight as she searched her memories for something that might explain the connection. Her late husband had never talked about the war, or about old friends, or about any Helen. Diane's mind spun with possibilities. Had he known? Had he been trying to protect them from something? Or had he just been afraid to face the past? Diane's tears fell silently onto the table. She clutched the faded blue ribbon and pressed it to her heart, as if trying to draw out forgotten memories. The storm outside had faded, but inside her, the ache of loss was sharp and fresh. The metal glinted in the lamplight, a tiny mirror reflecting grief and hope mingling in her tired eyes. Madison returned to the letters, finding a photograph tucked into one envelope. The picture was old, its corners curled and yellowed. It showed a young man, R.C., she guessed, in a crisp army uniform, standing beside a brown mare with a white blaze. Madison's breath hitched. The horse could have been Chestnut's twin. She hurried to the stall, flashlight shaking, and held the photo up for Chestnut to see. "What do you think? Is this your family?" Chestnut nosed the photo, eyes wide, her body suddenly very still. Madison watched, half hoping for a miracle, a sign, a memory, something only a horse could know. For a moment, the barn was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Then Chestnut snorted softly, blowing warm air over Madison's face, a wordless reassurance that she wasn't alone. "Maybe it's all just coincidence," Madison whispered, though she didn't quite believe it. "Or maybe you and me, we were meant to find each other, meant to find this." The night deepened. Madison read until her eyes blurred, and the letters slipped from her hands, Chestnut's steady breathing lulling her into a fragile peace. Above them, the storm finally drifted away, leaving only questions. Questions that felt suddenly less frightening, now that she knew she didn't have to face them alone. The days that followed drifted through the ranch like a heavy fog, thick, silent, impossible to shake. The storm had passed, but it left behind a different kind of unrest, a sense that nothing in the house would ever be simple again. Madison woke early each morning to the sound of Chestnut's hooves pacing just outside her window, the steady rhythm a constant comfort, and a reminder of everything that had changed. Inside the house, silence settled between Madison and Diane. They moved around each other with a kind of nervous choreography. Diane fixing coffee with her back to Madison. Madison slipping out to the barn before breakfast, neither willing to break the uneasy truce that now shaped their days. Sometimes they met in the hallway, eyes flicking away, the air full of questions neither knew how to ask. Chestnut became Madison's only confidant. In the afternoons, when the sky stretched wide and blue over the Montana hills, Madison led Chestnut out to the far pasture. The grass grew tall and wild, whispering around their ankles as they walked. Madison brushed the mare beneath the old cottonwood tree, her hands moving in slow, practiced circles. Chestnut stood still as stone, ears flicking, her body warm and solid beneath Madison's touch. "I don't know what to do anymore, girl," Madison murmured, the words tumbling out. "Everything feels wrong, and I keep thinking if I just ask the right question, it'll all make sense. But Mom's so far away now, and I'm scared to push." Her voice faded. The wind answered for her, rustling the grass, carrying her secrets into the open fields. She buried her face in Chestnut's mane, letting the mare's scent, earthy, sweet, familiar, anchor her. Sometimes she wept quietly, shoulders shaking as she remembered the way things used to be. Her father laughing on the porch, Diane humming in the kitchen, Chestnut grazing quietly under the window. Now there was only emptiness where comfort had lived. Madison traced the blue ribbon she kept in her pocket, the one from the box behind the mirror, as if its faded silk could bridge the gap between past and present. Chestnut nuzzled her gently, muzzle pressing into Madison's side. Madison smiled through tears. You always know when I need you, huh? The mayor snorted softly in reply. At night, Diane sat up late in her bedroom, the old riding ribbon clutched in her hand. She let memories drift through her mind like scattered puzzle pieces. Her husband's stories about his own father, the medals he kept locked away, the way he would sometimes stare out the window as if looking for someone he'd lost. Diane pressed the ribbon to her cheek, wondering what clues she'd missed over the years, what truths had gone unspoken out of love or fear. The silence in the house pressed in on her, thick as the storm that had shaken their world apart. Sleep came in fits and starts. Diane would wake in the dark, heart pounding, the ribbon tangled in her fist. Sometimes she thought she heard voices, her husband's laugh, a horse's distant whinny, the echo of a girl reading letters in the barn. She wondered if grief made ghosts of everyone, or if the past was finally coming due. One evening, just before sunset, Madison noticed something odd in Chestnut's behavior. The mare seemed restless, pacing the fence line, ears pricked toward the old barn. Madison watched, curiosity tugging at her. What is it, girl? You smell something. Chestnut tossed her head, then started toward the barn, pausing every few steps as if waiting for Madison to follow. Madison glanced back at the house, saw Diane watching from the porch, and felt a pang of longing. For a moment, she wished her mother would join her, would ask what she was doing, would just care. But Diane only nodded, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Madison jogged after Chestnut, heart beating fast. The mare led her around the back of the barn, to a spot Madison had never paid much attention to, a patch of loose earth hidden by tall weeds. Chestnut sniffed the ground, then pawed at it, sending clumps of dirt flying. Madison crouched, running her fingers through the soil, half expecting to find nothing but old roots. But something hard bumped her hand, a sliver of painted wood, splintered and weathered by time. Madison dug carefully, unearthing a small, rusted horseshoe nailed to a faded board. It was nothing much, but it felt important. A message maybe, or a memory left behind. Madison brushed the dirt away and carried the horseshoe back to the house, where she placed it on the kitchen table. Diane found it there after dinner, staring at it for a long time before she picked it up. He used to say a horse's shoe could bring luck, she murmured, almost to herself. But maybe it was just another secret he wanted to keep safe. The days blurred together. Chestnut continued her strange routines, guiding Madison to places she'd never explored, beneath the floorboards in the tack room, behind the hay bales in the loft, to a sunken spot near the creek where the grass grew in thick, tangled mats. Each time Madison found small, forgotten treasures, an old bridle, a faded photograph, a locket so tarnished its engraving was nearly gone. She kept them all, lining them up on her windowsill as silent witnesses to a history she was only beginning to understand. But the weight of silence remained. At dinner, Madison and Diane sat across from each other, the distance between them growing wider, even as Chestnut's discoveries pulled them toward the same truths. Sometimes late at night, Madison would hear her mother crying in the next room, the sound muffled but unmistakable. Other nights, Diane would find Madison asleep in the barn, letters clutched to her chest, Chestnut standing guard like a living shadow. Neither knew how to fix what was broken, but both kept searching, in their own quiet, desperate ways. It was as if the house itself demanded answers, the walls and floorboards alive with stories waiting to be told. Chestnut watched them both, her eyes dark and knowing, a bridge between mother and daughter, past and present. Madison often wondered what would happen if they stopped searching, if they just let the secrets stay buried, let the silence win. But then Chestnut would nudge her, gentle and insistent, and Madison would remember that some things were too important to leave in the dark. Rain returned to the Montana Valley in fitful bursts that week, drumming against the windows of the old ranch house and soaking the pastures until they shone slick and silver beneath the clouds. By now, word of the family's strange discoveries had quietly drifted through town. Just another bit of small-town gossip, growing with each telling. Madison felt the weight of it every time she went into the feed store or caught neighbors pausing a little too long at the fence line. The sense of unease never quite left her, as if the ground itself was waiting for the next secret to claw its way to the surface. On a gray afternoon, thunder low and distant, Madison led Chestnut toward the barn, the mare's coat slick from the damp air, her boots squelched in the mud. She was halfway to the door when she saw a shape on the long gravel drive, a tall, spare figure moving slowly, each step measured and deliberate. Madison stopped short, one hand tightening on Chestnut's reins. The visitor wore a broad-brimmed hat and a weathered overcoat, moving with the stiff, careful grace of someone accustomed to pain. For a moment, Madison considered running to the house, calling for her mother. But something about the old man's presence stilled her. He stopped a few yards away, raising a gloved hand in greeting, eyes kind but sharp beneath the shadow of his hat. "Good afternoon," he called, his voice gravelly, shaped by years and miles. "Sorry to show up unannounced. I'm looking for Diane or Madison Connolly." Madison nodded warily. "That's us. My mom's inside. Can I help you?" The man smiled, a flash of warmth beneath the beard. "Name's Russell Barrett. Used to serve with Robert Connolly, your father. Saw the news in the paper about that medal you found. Thought I might be able to answer a few questions." Chestnut stepped protectively between Madison and Russell, ears pinned back, hooves stamping with a warning thud. Russell regarded the horse with a nod of respect. "Easy, girl, easy. I mean no harm." Diane appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. She took one look at the stranger, her expression flickering between caution and recognition. Madison caught the subtle tightening of her mother's jaw, the way she folded her arms defensively. "Mr. Barrett?" Diane said, her tone polite but distant. "You knew my husband." "I did," Russell replied. "Back when we were both young and thought the world was easier to fix. He talked about this place all the time, about his family. I figured after what you uncovered, maybe I owed you a visit." Diane glanced at Madison, uncertainty passing between them. Still, she stepped aside, letting Russell into the kitchen, the smell of rain and coffee mingling in the air. Chestnut stood in the yard, tense and watchful, refusing to go back to her stall. Inside, Russell removed his hat and set it gently on the table, revealing close-cropped gray hair and a weathered face carved with lines of loss and laughter. He looked around, taking in the photographs on the walls, the medals and ribbons on the mantelpiece. "It hasn't changed much," he said softly. Diane poured coffee for them both, hands shaking just a little as she set the mugs down. Madison slid into the chair beside her mother, her heart thumping in her chest. Russell reached into his coat and produced a thick, sealed envelope. "This," he said, pushing it across the table, "is from Robert. He gave it to me a long time ago. Told me to deliver it only if I thought it was time. Guess you finally found what he never could bring himself to explain." Diane stared at the envelope, her eyes shining. "Why now? Why not years ago?" Russell's shoulders slumped. "We all keep secrets we shouldn't." "He loved you, Diane. He loved you and Madison more than anything. But some parts of a man's life, they're too heavy to share. Not until you're ready to carry them." Madison watched her mother, saw the flicker of hope and fear as Diane broke the seal. The letter inside was written in her father's bold hand, each word weighted with regret. If you found this, you found my greatest regret. Forgive what I could never say. The letter was full of apologies and half-revealed truths, memories of a friend named R.C., a woman named Helen, and a child lost before their time. Madison struggled to understand, reading over Diane's shoulder. Her mother's hands trembled as she reached the final page, which spoke of a grave hidden in the northern paddock, beneath a willow tree planted long before Madison was born. He wanted us to find something, Madison said, voice thin. Russell nodded, his eyes sad. He wanted you to trust Chestnut. That mare knows the way. Always did. Thunder rumbled, shaking the old window panes. Chestnut, still outside, circled the porch, ears flicking back and forth, as if listening for instructions from the past. Diane's guard began to slip. She looked at Russell, not as an intruder now, but as a last link to the man she'd loved. Did you know R.C.? Who was he really? Russell hesitated, gaze distant. He was Robert's best friend, fought beside him in Korea, saved his life more than once. He loved horses, loved this land. The medal was his, a symbol of what he lost. Robert promised to keep his memory safe, but grief, it makes cowards of us all. The rain intensified, drumming steady on the roof. Madison found herself reaching for Diane's hand, squeezing it tight. Russell finished his coffee and stood, the chair scraping quietly on the worn linoleum. There's one more thing, he said. He wanted you to have this. He pressed a small, tarnished key into Madison's palm. It's for a box in the tack room. You'll know it when you see it. As Russell stepped outside, Chestnut followed him to the gate, nose pressed to his shoulder. He patted her neck. Take care of them, girl. Diane watched him go, tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks. She held the letter close, chest rising and falling with a grief that was finally letting in a sliver of hope. Madison wrapped her arms around her mother. The storm outside began to ease, but inside the house, the past felt suddenly nearer, as if someone had opened a window and let it breathe. Later, as dusk painted the sky purple and gold, Chestnut pawed restlessly at the north fence line, her gaze fixed on the willow in the distance. Madison's pulse quickened. The secrets weren't finished with them yet. Night in Montana could be a strange, haunting thing. Wind sighing across the hills, moonlight silvering the grass, shadows shifting across fields that held more secrets than most folks cared to know. That night, after Russell's visit and the reading of her father's letter, Madison lay wide awake in her room, listening to the quiet creaks of the house and the soft, distant thud of Chestnut's hooves against the barn floor. The letter's words kept circling in her head. If you found this, you found my greatest regret. Trust Chestnut. She knows the way. Thunder rumbled far off, a leftover echo from the storm, but the air now was charged with something else, anticipation, maybe even fear. When the clock in the hallway chimed midnight, Madison threw off her blanket and tiptoed down the darkened hall. She found Diane already awake in the kitchen, her mother's hands wrapped tight around a mug of tea, eyes shadowed and restless. You can't sleep either, Madison whispered, voice almost lost in the hush of the house. Diane shook her head, then stood and wrapped an arm around Madison's shoulders. For the first time in days, Madison felt the familiar warmth of her mother's love. Tinged with uncertainty, yes, but steady all the same. Do you want to go out there? Diane asked softly, nodding toward the north pasture. See if Chestnut knows what your father meant. Madison nodded, her throat too tight for words. She pulled on her boots, grabbed a flashlight. and together they stepped into the cool, damp air. The moon hung low, casting just enough light to turn the fields ghostly and strange. In the barn, Chestnut was already waiting, ears pricked, eyes shining with an intelligence that made Madison's skin prickle. It was as if the mare had been waiting all along for this moment. Chestnut moved ahead as soon as Madison slipped the halter on, not needing any urging. Diane followed close behind, boots sinking into the soft, rain-soaked ground. They moved in silence, just the crunch of their footsteps, Chestnut's steady breath, and the faraway song of a coyote drifting through the night. The pasture seemed endless in the moonlight, the grass waving in silver currents around their knees. Madison's heart hammered with each step. She could feel Diane's anxiety growing behind her, could hear her mother's breaths coming quicker, her grip tightening on Madison's arm whenever a branch snapped or the wind shifted. But Chestnut never faltered. The mare's gait was purposeful, nose lowered, hooves splashing through puddles as she led them north, past the old barn, beyond the apple orchard, and finally to the edge of the property where a lone willow stood, its branches trailing over a wild, flower-strewn patch of ground. Chestnut halted, nostrils flaring. She pawed at the earth, scattering petals and moss. Madison knelt beside her, running her hands over the tangled grass. Her fingers found something solid, a stone, half buried and worn smooth by years of rain and sun. "Here," she breathed, glancing up at Diane, whose eyes shone in the moonlight. Diane knelt beside Madison, her hands trembling as she brushed away the soil. The stone was small and unmarked at first, but as they cleared it, letters emerged from beneath the moss. Grace 1952-1959. For a moment, none of them moved. The wind stirred the willow, making its branches dance across the grave. Madison felt tears prick her eyes, a sudden wave of sadness crashing over her. She didn't know Grace, had never even heard the name, but the stone, the grave, the sense of care someone had once shown here, it all felt heartbreakingly real. Diane traced the letters with her fingertip, her voice unsteady. She was just a child. Madison looked at her, confused. "Do you think... Is this Helen's daughter?" Diane shook her head slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe Grace was the mare in the photograph. Your father's friend wrote about a horse named Grace. He said she was family, the only one he trusted with his heart." Chestnut stood utterly still, her breath warm on Madison's cheek. The mare lowered her head, pressing her nose to the gravestone, as if paying her respects. Madison placed her hand on Chestnut's neck, drawing comfort from her steadiness. "What do we do now?" Madison whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Diane brushed a tear from her cheek. "We remember. We tell the truth. And we let Chestnut show us the rest, when she's ready." The three of them stayed there for a long time, the night thick around them, listening to the wind. Above, the moon slid behind a cloud, darkening the pasture. Madison shivered, not from cold, but from the strange sense that the past was somehow closer now, less a shadow and more a presence, alive in the rustle of the willow, the hush of Chestnut's breath. When they finally turned to leave, Madison looked back at the stone, promising herself she would return. Diane slipped an arm around her daughter, and for the first time in what felt like years, Madison let herself lean into her mother's side. They walked home together, Chestnut trailing behind, her coat shining faintly in the moonlight. Back at the house, the air felt lighter, the silence less heavy. Diane squeezed Madison's hand. "Thank you for trusting her," she whispered. "And for trusting me." Madison smiled, exhausted but peaceful. She knew the answers wouldn't come all at once. Maybe some would never come. But for the first time since the storm, she believed they would be able to face whatever waited in the dark. Together. Outside, Chestnut paused at the edge of the pasture, gazing back at the willow and the grave that had waited so long to be found. Madison watched her through the window until sleep finally pulled her under, the sound of the mare's steady breath guiding her safely into dreams. Word spread faster than wildflowers in June. By sunrise the next morning, the old ranch was buzzing with the aftermath of the previous night's discovery. The news was simple but electrifying. Mare uncovers forgotten grave. First it was Mrs. Jasper, the neighbor from 2 miles up the road, standing at the fence with her binoculars. By noon, it was the county historian, a couple of local journalists, and, much to Madison's embarrassment, 2 wide-eyed kids from her math class, phones held high, hoping to catch a glimpse of Chestnut, the now legendary horse. The Connolly Ranch, once a refuge of silence and solitude, pulsed with new energy. Strangers peered over the fence, talking in low voices about family secrets, lost medals, and the story of a grave hidden by time. The community's curiosity was a force all its own. People arrived with casseroles, bouquets, old photographs, and more questions than answers. Madison felt as if she was standing in the eye of a storm, every moment vibrating with the thrill and anxiety of sudden attention. She tried to slip away, seeking comfort in Chestnut's stall. The mare, usually shy around visitors, had grown calm and steady, her presence like an anchor in the whirlwind. Whenever the excitement and noise got too much, Madison would press her forehead to Chestnut's, letting the soft sound of the horse's breath bring her back to herself. But even Chestnut couldn't shield Madison from everything. Reporters crowded the porch, their notebooks bristling with sharp questions. How did you know where to look? Was it really the horse? Do you believe in ghosts? Madison answered as best she could, her cheeks flushed, heart pounding. Sometimes she saw Diane's pale, uncertain face in the crowd, searching for her daughter and a little peace. It wasn't all bad. Some of the visitors brought stories of their own, whispered tales of lost relatives, mysterious medals, and animals that seemed to know more than people ever could. One old man, stooped and gentle, pressed a faded photograph into Madison's palm. "That's my brother," he said. "He served with your grandfather. He always said horses were the bravest souls in any war." Diane watched all this with wary eyes. She kept her distance at first, uncertain how to protect what was left of their privacy. But as the days passed and neighbors lingered, something in her softened. She began to talk, piecing together old family stories over coffee at the kitchen table, filling in gaps Madison never knew existed. She showed the medal and ribbon to Mrs. Jasper, laughing for the first time in weeks when Mrs. Jasper insisted she'd known there was something magical about the ranch all along. The county museum caught wind of the story and sent a representative to the ranch, asking if they could archive the letters and artifacts for the local history collection. Madison hesitated, not wanting to give up the precious pieces of her father's past. But Diane, her voice strong and clear, said, "We'll share what we found. It belongs to the community, too." The museum's interest brought new visitors, and soon the entire community began planning a memorial for Grace, the lost mare, or the lost child, as some guessed, buried so many decades ago. A local florist donated wildflowers, and children from the elementary school painted stones to place around the grave. Madison helped string white ribbons between the willow's branches, watching as the grave was transformed from a lonely patch of earth to a place of quiet beauty and memory. Through it all, Chestnut was never far from Madison's side. If the crowd grew too loud, The mare would nuzzle Madison's shoulder or stand like a sentinel by the fence, her calm presence settling even the most skeptical adults. People began bringing their own children to visit, especially those who struggled with anxiety or grief. Something about Chestnut seemed to ease their fears. A shy boy with a stutter stroked her nose and managed a full sentence for the first time in weeks. An elderly woman grieving her own loss sat with Chestnut for an hour and left with tears in her eyes and a small smile on her lips. Diane watched all this, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She started talking to Madison more. Long, winding conversations about the past, about Madison's father, about the choices people make to protect the ones they love. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, Chestnut grazing nearby, and look out over the fields, the air heavy with the scent of rain and wild sage. One night, as the sky blushed gold with sunset, the local news van pulled into the drive, cameras and microphones at the ready. Madison braced herself, but this time she didn't run. She stood by Chestnut, answered their questions, and spoke about what she'd learned. Sometimes the past has to be uncovered before you can really understand where you belong, she said, her voice clear and steady. And sometimes it's a horse that helps you find your way home. The news story aired the following evening. For a moment, Madison was embarrassed to see her face on the television, but then she saw the messages from classmates and neighbors. Messages of pride, of shared stories, of thanks. The grave beneath the willow became a place for everyone, and Chestnut, once just Madison's horse, became a symbol of hope and healing for the entire community. As summer deepened and the crowds began to thin, Madison realized something had shifted within her. She was no longer just a girl carrying the weight of her father's secrets. She was part of something bigger, a web of memory and belonging that stretched far beyond the ranch. And as she stood beneath the willow one quiet afternoon, Chestnut at her side, Madison felt, for the first time in a long time, truly at peace. As the weeks turned into months, the Connolly Ranch became a place of quiet miracles. Where once the air had been heavy with secrets and sorrow, now laughter drifted over the pastures, carried by the wind that rustled through the willow and danced with the wildflowers on Grace's grave. Madison had never imagined so much could change, but Chestnut's steady presence and the truths unearthed had rewritten their world. Madison and Diane, once so cautious with each other, found themselves working side by side, each day bringing new discoveries both small and profound. They'd fallen into a rhythm, a partnership built on honesty and a willingness to face whatever came, no matter how painful. They combed through the ranch's nooks and crannies, following Chestnut's subtle cues. The mare would nicker or flick her ears toward a certain spot, and Madison would find herself drawn to it. Sometimes a forgotten trunk in the attic, sometimes an old box tucked high on a garage shelf, sometimes a hollow beneath the porch where only a child or a horse would have noticed. One golden morning, after a night of restless dreams, Chestnut led Madison and Diane to the far side of the barn. Beneath a pile of old tack, Madison's fingers brushed against something cold and smooth, a small leather-bound diary. The edges were cracked and faded, the clasp broken, but inside the writing was clear and determined. The diary belonged to Helen, the woman from R.C.'s letters. As Diane read aloud, her voice grew stronger with each page. Helen's words painted a portrait of courage, longing, and sacrifice. She wrote about R.C.'s tenderness, about Grace, the mare whose grave now bloomed with wild violets, and about the promises and heartbreak that shaped their lives in a world that often demanded silence. Madison listened, heart aching and full. She recognized the loneliness in Helen's words, the fear of losing the ones she loved, the hope that somehow, what was lost could be found again. The diary's last entry was dated the night before Grace died. I hope someday someone will remember and forgive us all. Chestnut nuzzled the book, her breath warming Madison's hand. Diane set the diary down gently, as if it were a fragile bird. She wanted someone to know the truth, she whispered. She wanted someone to remember them as they really were. That afternoon, as clouds gathered on the horizon, Madison and Diane found a silver locket inside an old jewelry box buried in the attic. Inside was a photo of R.C. and Helen together, smiling under the big Montana sky, and a tiny curl of chestnut-colored horsehair. Madison pressed the locket into Diane's palm, and her mother's eyes shone with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of gratitude. The discoveries brought mother and daughter closer than they'd been in years. Madison noticed the small things, how Diane's voice grew lighter, how her laughter sounded less forced, how her hugs lingered a moment longer. They spent long evenings on the porch, piecing together family history with the help of old photographs, community stories, and the artifacts they'd uncovered. They laughed over stories of Madison's childhood antics, and Diane shared memories of her husband's quirks and kindness, stories she'd never found the words for before. Chestnut, now a local legend, took on a new role. Children from around town, especially those struggling with grief or anxiety, began coming to the ranch for quiet afternoons with the mare. Some came with their parents, some with counselors, and some simply wandered up the drive, drawn by stories of the horse who found the grave. Madison watched Chestnut work her quiet magic, standing patient as a rock while a shy little girl learned to braid her mane, or letting a grieving boy rest his forehead against her shoulder in silent understanding. With every gentle nuzzle, Chestnut seemed to say, "You're safe here. You're not alone." Inspired by their journey, Diane and Madison worked together to compile R.C. and Helen's letters, photographs, and the diary into a small, self-published collection. They called it Letters from the Willow, and the local library put it on display. People came from across the county to read the love story, to study the old photographs, to run their fingers over the faded blue ribbon that had survived decades in hiding. Some shared their own stories of loss and rediscovery. Some simply stood in silence, remembering. The collection caught the attention of a regional historical society, and soon Madison found herself giving talks at local schools and libraries. At first, she was shy, stumbling over her words, but Chestnut was always nearby, waiting in the parking lot, the barn, or just outside a classroom window, her presence like a beacon. Madison would steady herself, remember the lessons she'd learned, and find the courage to speak her truth. The process was healing, not just for Madison and Diane, but for everyone who touched the story. Neighbors mended old rifts. Families who hadn't spoken in years sat together at the memorial for Grace, sharing stories of their own ancestors. The ranch, once shrouded in grief, became a place of reunion and new beginnings. One soft twilight, as the sun painted the sky with gold and lavender, Madison walked out to Grace's grave. She knelt in the grass, tracing the letters with gentle fingers, Chestnut grazing nearby. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing us back together, for teaching us that healing isn't about forgetting, but about remembering and forgiving." As she rose, Madison saw Diane waving from the porch, holding out the new edition of their family's letters. The porch lights glowed, the house alive with music and laughter, a sign that the past no longer held them captive. It had become a bridge, connecting them to each other, to Chestnut, and to a future that, at last, felt bright and wide open. Autumn settled over the Montana ranch in a cascade of gold, rust, and fading green. The air sharpened, crisp with the promise of coming winter, and every morning the fields shivered beneath a lace of silver frost. Yet the ranch felt warmer than ever. Where silence and sorrow once lived, there was now an undercurrent of gentle hope. Even the shadows seemed softer, as if touched by all that had changed. Madison spent her afternoons beneath the old willow, its branches drooping low over Grace's grave. The grass here grew tall and wild, gold and green tangled with late-blooming violets. Madison always brought a notebook, her father's old journal, its leather soft from years of use, now filled with her own looping handwriting. Sometimes she'd read her thoughts aloud, her voice mixing with the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet, steady sound of Chestnut grazing nearby. Chestnut had become Madison's confidant and companion, always at her side through every uncertain step of healing. The mare's presence was grounding, a living link to the past, but also a guide into the future. On warm afternoons, Madison would rest her cheek against Chestnut's shoulder, drawing strength from the mare's slow, even breath. She spoke her worries, her memories, her wishes for what might come. Chestnut never answered, at least not in words, but Madison always left the willow tree lighter, as if some invisible weight had been shared. One afternoon, as golden leaves spun through the breeze, Diane joined Madison under the willow. She settled onto the blanket, knees drawn to her chest, her gaze wandering over the grave and the fields beyond. They sat in silence for a while, watching the light shift, shadows lengthen, the ranch humming with quiet activity, a distant tractor, the call of geese heading south, the low rumble of Chestnut's contented snort. Madison finally broke the quiet. I always thought if we dug deep enough we'd find something terrible. I was so scared to know the truth. But now, it doesn't feel so scary. Diane nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. Secrets have a way of growing when you hide them. They turn into monsters in the dark. But once you speak them, once you let them out, they're just stories. Painful, yes, but human. Madison looked down at her journal, running her fingers over the words she'd written. Do you think Dad was ashamed? Or just afraid? Diane drew a shaky breath. I think he was both. He wanted to protect us, but he was scared we'd be hurt by what he couldn't change. I think he didn't understand that what hurts the most isn't the truth. It's being alone with it. Chestnut wandered over, lowering her head into Madison's lap. Madison stroked the mare's forelock, blinking back tears. She knew, Mom, even before we did. She was never just a horse. She was a part of our story. She's more than that, Diane said, her voice trembling and strong at once. She's the reason we started talking again. The reason we stopped pretending everything was fine. They fell quiet, the wind whispering around them, carrying the scent of earth and fallen leaves. Diane reached for Madison's hand. I'm sorry I couldn't talk about it before. I thought if I stayed strong, I'd be helping you. But I think maybe what we needed was to be honest. Even when it was ugly, even when it hurt. Madison squeezed her mother's hand, her heart swelling with relief and sadness, gratitude and loss. Me too. I was so angry all the time. At you, at Dad, at myself. I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could hold everything together. But I couldn't. I didn't have to. They sat like that a long time, shoulders pressed together, letting the warmth of forgiveness settle over them. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't perfect. There were still sharp edges, old wounds that would ache on cold mornings, memories that would always sting a little. But there was peace, too, a kind that came from facing the truth together. As the sun dropped lower, The ranch glowed with the colors of memory. Madison took up her pen, writing not about sorrow or regret, but about gratitude, for her mother's strength, for Chestnut's unwavering loyalty, for the stories that had shaped their family, even the ones wrapped in pain. She wrote about the way Chestnut had guided them, about the power of animals to sense what people tried to ignore. She wrote about the letters, the hidden grave, the kindness of neighbors, the unexpected healing that had come from sharing their burdens. Her words were less about answers and more about understanding, that sometimes what matters most isn't the resolution, but the willingness to keep searching. Diane closed her eyes, letting the breeze play across her face. "I think Grace would be proud," she murmured. "And your father, too. Not because we found all the answers, but because we didn't give up. Because we kept loving each other, even when it was hard." Madison smiled, closing her journal. She leaned into her mother, feeling, maybe for the first time in her life, completely seen, completely known. Chestnut whinnied softly, as if adding her voice to the agreement. "You know," Madison said, voice gentle, "it's not just us. There are so many people carrying secrets, grief, all alone. Maybe if we tell our story, it'll help them feel less alone too." Diane nodded, brushing a lock of hair from Madison's cheek. "That's the gift the past gives us," she said. "A chance to reach out, to change the way things end." As twilight deepened, they lingered together. The bonds of their family strengthened not by hiding pain, but by sharing it. Under the willow, near Grace's grave, surrounded by the gentle presence of Chestnut and the whisper of autumn wind, Madison and Diane finally let themselves rest in the knowledge that facing the truth had given them back something they thought was lost: each other. And as the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the hills, the ranch stood peaceful and alive, a place where the past and present had finally found a way to coexist, not as a burden, but as a source of quiet, enduring strength. 1 year later, the Connolly Ranch was transformed. Where sadness had once seeped into every floorboard and shadow, laughter now bounced off the porch rails and floated across the fields, carried by the wind and the gentle hum of community. The willow tree, once a lonely sentinel over a forgotten grave, now stood at the center of an annual celebration that drew friends, neighbors, and strangers alike from miles around. Children dashed across the grass, their shouts bright and free as they chased each other between hay bales and wildflowers. Families gathered on quilts spread beneath the willow, passing around lemonade, fried chicken, and homemade pies. Old friends reunited, and new friendships blossomed in the shared sunlight of healing and remembrance. Madison, standing at the edge of the gathering, felt both small and infinite, her heart full with the knowledge of how far her family and her own soul had traveled. Chestnut was the star of the day. Her coat shone in the late summer sun, ribbons woven through her mane by the younger children who had come to know and love her over the past months. The mare carried children gently around the pasture, her steps slow and careful, her presence as grounding as ever. Even the most anxious or withdrawn child seemed to relax in her company, their worries dissolving into smiles as they stroked her neck or whispered secrets into her soft, listening ears. The annual celebration was more than just a party. It was a living memorial, a tribute to Grace, to lost loved ones, to the long and winding journey that had brought the Connollys and their community together. A table near the willow overflowed with photos, letters, and mementos. The first published copy of Letters from the Willow lay beside the faded blue ribbon, the silver locket, and the medal engraved with R.C. Local musicians played folk songs on the porch. At dusk, people took turns reading excerpts from the letters and diary, their voices weaving the past into the present with tenderness and respect. Madison felt the old nerves fluttering in her stomach as she prepared to speak. She'd grown, changed, and learned to face crowds over the year, but some parts of her would always be the quiet girl who'd once tried to fix everything by herself. She walked to the makeshift podium near Grace's restored grave, her mother and Chestnut standing just behind her. The crowd fell silent, faces open and expectant, the evening light turning the ranch golden. She took a breath, grounding herself with the steady weight of the locket in her palm. "A year ago I was scared," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I was scared of the past, scared of what I didn't understand, scared of what it meant to lose someone you love. I thought if I ignored the pain, it would go away. But all it did was grow bigger and heavier. It kept me from my mom, from my friends, even from myself." She looked at Diane, who smiled through tears. Madison's confidence grew. But then Chestnut showed us the way. She made us face the secrets we'd buried, the ones we thought were too painful to speak out loud. And when we finally did, we found something we'd been missing all along: hope, forgiveness, a chance to start again. A hush settled over the gathering. Madison glanced at the children playing, at the elders holding hands, at the neighbors who'd become family. We learned that healing isn't just about letting go. It's about holding on to the stories that made us who we are. Even the hard stories, the ones with sorrow and regret. Because those are the stories that remind us to love each other, to listen, and to never stop asking questions, no matter how difficult. She turned to the grave, where a bouquet of wildflowers rested against the stone. Grace was lost for a long time, but now, because we were willing to search, to face what was hidden, her story and ours gets to live on. And Chestnut, she's more than a horse. She's a reminder that sometimes the ones who heal us are the ones who never say a word. Diane stepped forward, wrapping her daughter in a hug, her own voice trembling with gratitude as she faced the crowd. "Thank you all," Diane said, "for standing by us, for believing in second chances, for making this ranch a place of healing. Thank you, Chestnut, for being our bridge. And thank you, Madison, for teaching me that love and truth are always worth the risk." Applause rippled through the crowd, gentle and real. Someone started a song, and voices rose in harmony beneath the willow. The community wove a garland of wildflowers for Chestnut and placed it over her neck, the mare bowing her head in quiet acceptance, her eyes reflecting the last of the sunset. As the sky deepened into indigo, Madison placed the first printed copy of their family's story at Grace's grave. She knelt in the soft grass, tracing the letters with her fingertips. "We remember you. We promise to keep asking questions, to honor those who came before, and to trust that healing is possible. No matter how long it takes." She stood, facing the crowd, her voice stronger, surer than ever. "I hope that if you're listening, you'll ask yourself, what stories are waiting to be discovered in your own home? Who will you trust to help you find them? Healing isn't something you have to do alone. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to look, to ask, and to let someone, human or animal, walk the path beside you." The crowd quieted, thoughtful, the weight of her words settling in. For a long moment, the only sound was the evening breeze in the willow's branches, the slow, steady breathing of Chestnut, the distant laughter of children. As the stars appeared, the celebration continued. Music, stories, and the promise of new beginnings. The ranch glowed with life, a living tapestry of memory, love, and hope. The past, once a heavy secret, was now a gift, a story to be shared, a lesson to be cherished, a call to action that would ripple through the lives of all who listened. And as Madison watched her mother, Chestnut, and the people she loved gather beneath the willow, she knew this truth would outlast any storm, that healing, once begun, could spread like light, binding families, communities, and even lost souls forever.